So hi, welcome back to Ethics TV, and this is Jonathan, joined today by Sal Kimmich, who the description you can read the biography to your heart's content and all the links. And Sal, as I always do at the beginning of these shows, is to ask this. It's the only standard question. I used to have a set 5 questions, and it was extremely tedious, it bored even me. So now I'm only going to have the standard first question, which is, what are you up to? What's keeping you busy? What are you most excited about what you're doing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. So right now I am very busy because I've given myself a tight timeline relatively to write a book. And I'm writing a book on the subject of understanding the security posture for sovereignty. And there's a lot of different ways that that looks. It's keeping me really busy because I have been doing that in the style of bringing in people from my network and people that have been suggested to me for a good 30-minute interview. But before on this topic, I take them in for any quotes. I just say, all right, let's have a 30-minute talk where I will not record anything. It's on a like trusted server, and I will only handwrite notes that I take out of it. It's been really, really fun. The policy advisors that I speak to are really fascinated by this subject, but my cybersecurity experts seem to be taking it as a form of therapy.
Love that.
And yeah, I've heard some stories I was not expecting from like the 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s, really diving into the history of this. So that's keeping me busy. It's giving me a lot to reflect on the ways that we have improved the internet experience.
Hmm.
And I'm enjoying it a lot.
Well, and that's actually, I mean, obviously, I won't ask you any of the contentious information that you just mentioned, which sounds fascinating. And also, I sympathize or empathize about the book situation, at least with the time frame that you've given yourself, because from writing many books myself, I must admit that everything seemed to take at least 4 times longer than I thought they would. Especially when I thought I had a complete picture of what was going on, and then I start writing, and then it turns out to go completely off kilter, and then out writing a completely different book. But with that, the ways of the how the internet has changed, and specifically around ethical practices, is what I'd like to dig into first. Your background and your credentials go almost without saying, but anyone can read in the description about all of that stuff. And it leads me to wonder whether you have seen, maybe not specifically from just the usage of things like open source, but or concepts or philosophies like open source, but in terms of ethical practices and responsibility, and specifically digital sovereignty, which happens to be my core focus of effort right now in what I'm doing. What changes have you seen in your period of time in this space?
Yeah, so it's definitely interesting. There's a couple of through lines that I've been able to see, especially if you take this from, I mean, I was asking the question in this case, like, how has the internet evolved and how does sovereignty start to take shape within that? Because it is interesting. I think there's been a bit of a severing of the traditional ideas of sovereignty when you get online. Sovereignty is usually tied to geographical borders if you're talking about nations or nation states. And then there's individual sovereignty, which is really a person's exposure of their own positive rights. And I think it's something core to the way that the internet started up, right? So we never would have gotten a public internet if kernels could not have been ensured to be secure. And open source security means that not just that you can go and play with the code as it does with most parts of open source, but it means is that I could leave the instructions for how to build the thing on the floor for an adversary to pick up, and they still would not be able to hack my system. It's only by having that kind of engineering over the kernels that helped us to build out the beginning of Linux and beginning of the modern internet that really got us started there. But a thing that I'm seeing now, really interestingly, is that we've built out a very large, very globalized system, and it's starting to intentionally fracture apart a little bit. It's becoming a little bit more like traditional geopolitics sovereignty is, where people want to protect their data, protect their identities, and specifically, really right now in this pre-quantum moment, protect any databases that have large amounts of citizen data in them. Um,
Mhm.
and I've seen that go two ways. We're getting much better hardware for security, and we are making sure that we know when and where data is stored. We've got much better encryption than we ever had 20 years ago. So that's a massive advancement. Um, but I think the thing that is hard to really put words around, but you can see it happen in practice, is that the idea, like the philosophical idea of positive and negative rights, right? Negative rights are things that a system can enact on you, and positive rights are things that you can enact in a system. An understanding of those, and that the whole world levels, that you've got a nation states database or your financial data, they kind of now have the same security posture.
Hmm.
uh, it's becoming a like shared threat model, and that's making individuals more aware of how they can and should be engaging with the internet. They have to be considering what databases they have their data on. So yeah, I think what's been beautiful is to see that we've had a lot of mess ups over the last couple of years, especially in the vulnerability space, and those have been traditionally held on to, or I guess I'm going to go over this real quickly because I think it's important. Vulnerabilities, if you've ever heard of like log4j, log4shell, any of these large vulnerabilities, typically that would have gone through a pathway where there's a security researcher. It gets taken up to something like MITRE or CVE. We label it as being a critical vulnerability. And then there's a moment in time that not many people know about. Uh, Before it becomes a 0 day, which is when we disclose it to the public, we go through a multi-week period of making sure that vulnerability is removed from any critical government databases, any financial institution databases, anything that we deem to have an outsized impact. And then we release that open source vulnerability to the world at large. When I talk about this fracturing, we've just seen in the last 2 weeks potentially removal of funding from the US from the largest and most stable vulnerability database. And that has brought up conversations around Europe and other places of, okay, how are we going to create a new security posture? How are we going to de-platform the only vulnerability database that we have built our systems out on? That's intelligent thinking now. It's not using sovereignty as a philosophy, it's using it as a security posture. I find that really interesting.
Well, yes, and I mean, it's preaching to the converted, and most of the people who watch this would know how many times I would bang on for about moving things from a philosophy to an actual practical structure. More so, I mean, even more so, what you're saying from a security posture position. Do you think that I'm going to play devil's advocate in this question somewhat, or it may even be a rhetorical question. Would that more fundamental view, or rather, sorry, would that movement towards a more practical um, posture make it easier to explain the importance of the validity and authenticity and integrity of data sets, specifically personal identifiable data sets? Does this help in the argumentation structure of our jobs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think an awareness of sort of digital identity as an individual is really important, but it has changed a lot in terms of the ways that you could be captured as an identity online. So we're all very familiar with things like phishing, things where, did I leave my social security number out somewhere, right? But the way that you can be captured as an individual and sort of protect yourself has really, really, really changed. So conceptually now, the internet is very big and it's littered with a lot of content. If you accidentally release something like a social security number or a national insurance number yourself, that's not actually extremely highly identifiable. It's in the social security number is 9 numbers. There are billions of 9 number sequences online, unless it's tied to valuable information. What hackers do now are try to go after the major databases that will allow them to get a large number of individuals' data at one time. So there is a reason why there are regulated environments, so healthcare and finance and government. If you are able to collect data from one data set and another data set, this allows for a condition called unicity, where they can, before even looking at those data sets, they can calculate whether or not they'll be able to identify an individual or a group of individuals. And this has a very high both upper and lower bound, which means the accuracy rates in that are really high. So I know if I'm trying to find Bob, Charlie, and Alice, and I've got this data set intersecting with this other data set, my probability goes up. If I've got 5 points of data available within that data set, it goes up to above 90% chance that I will find all three of those individuals. And I think the thing that really sort of illustrated this to me as being something probably out of our individual control for now.
Mm.
And I know this might not go perfectly with your argument, but it's kind of the truth of the world. Um, there was a bunch of data uh, from the National Institutes of Health in the US, and this is in 2017, that we were not able to release that year. When we have government funded research studies, we're required to release, we scrub it, we make it private data, we make it so that no individual can be identified in theory. But even with all of those best practices, there was a major data breach from Netflix that year. And just from having that data alone, the Netflix data and the data that was scrubbed and openly available from the controls that they brought in, not necessarily the patients, but the controls that they were comparing them to, because these are people that often live in that region. The one intersecting data point was their postal code. We were able to fully re-identify those individuals. We couldn't release a bunch of data sets from our research that year. So the nature of how you can protect yourself and posture yourself as an individual have really, really, really changed, because computation is now the name of the game. Um, and that opens up multi-dimensional eyes on all of the data that you release. But there are a lot of ways where you can be more careful about it and make good choices about the data sets that you choose to be within, right?
Mm. And do you think that the opportunity with decentralizing networks to, let's take it to the nth degree here. So an individual running their own node of a network and that being a fully validating and constructing node of a network that there's a kind of implements some extent a layer of abstraction away from having a single view to being a network of millions of nodes, all with individual sovereignty. Do you feel that, I mean, this is echoing the conversations that I was having in the groups in the first web groups in 93, 94, 95. That was one of the ideals that we were discussing. And do you feel that still holds an idealistic North Star in some cases of that decentralization argument?
Absolutely. I mean, that's not even an idealization. That is true. So if you're creating a system in which it's not tied directly to true individual data, I mean, we're talking about critical data on the kind of vulnerabilities that I cover. Yeah, if you've got a distributed or federated node system, you're probably in a very, very good spot that is well engineered. Um, it is still the case, though, that if you're working a two separate problems, yeah, federated nodes, you're in a good spot. Large databases, which is, I think, what people aren't really realizing, we're not in a good spot. That's how the internet has been traditionally constructed, right? So yes, that is a very good example of building in a new way that does allow for self-sovereignty in the system, and it's pretty cyber secure.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that we're starting now after 30 years of these conversations to arrive at it's less, I'm beginning to get invited to dinner parties again because because in the late 90s these conversations like you were I mean I'm just over the moon, like people like you for instance are actually not only recognized as being some of the amongst the most innovative leaders of us, but also the requirement of being sought after as a speaker. Because when I started speaking about this stuff, I remember like people would get me in to speak on these things and they'd quietly say to me before I went on stage, can you just go easy on the whole like idealistic stuff and the kind of the way that things could be? Can you just talk about the way things are? And now it seems that I mean, I think it's no longer a surprise to people when a giant database that has a single point of failure gets exploited, and no one's shocked anymore. I mean, it's now a common practice that you may even not see these things in the news as much because it's like, oh no way, this giant single attack vector database has been exploited. Who knew? Whereas 20 years ago or 30 years ago, if you stood up and said that the emperor is not wearing any clothes, or in this metaphor, there is one a single point of failure, or there's an attack vector which is in Comic Sans font, 38 point. Nowadays, it's not a surprise. Has that moved toward these topics being less niche, something that you've noticed from like even taking it from the kind of the Red Hat days in the past through to now every fourth person I know is running some form of Linux distro. Has this popularity become something you've noticed happening in your time?
Yeah, I think, well, I think there's generational differences in people's interest or even capacity to take control of their own systems. And I think there's two different lines that are important. When you're looking at like geopolitical or nation state or sovereign state, or nation, which are three separate things to really understand. They all function differently. I think the only important thing to understand, if I say nation state, it means it's got a military. That has a different whole set of requirements to it. Um, the way that they behave and they engage, it's usually they've got a lot more resources than an individual does, right? But these days, if I want to build a secure network, it's just as easy as it was in the 80s if you have the skills to do it. And it's so much cheaper than it used to be. So if I take a personal meeting, I know exactly where the server is in which all of that web data goes through, right? I know exactly how it's constructed. Um, and I think that sort of the control and self-determination is something that I think was very important to people who grew up with the internet. And it's becoming less of something that even is considered for those that are sort of the second wave or second generation or now third generation of the internet. Because the internet has wildly changed. It has a lot more paywalls. It's a lot more sanitized
Hmm.
for a corporatized experience. And so I've seen that even around the Linux world, where, yes, there's still the distros, the kernel, everything that you've always relied on is there. But there's a little bit of a concern that even at that level, we're going to lose some open source projects to a quote unquote business license. That's a change in open source. And I think open source is really important because it is quite literally the digital commons. It is the only thing that we have to rely on if you want to work independently or sovereignty oriented. You must use open source. There's nothing else to build with, right? Um, so I hope that we do keep that. And I do my best to go on podcasts like this to remind people, hey, this is really something you have to consider. I will say the conversations around sovereignty generally. They're very much coming into the light right now, but for me, they do not feel new at all. One of the things I've really been reflecting on is that the conversations I'm just starting to see come out of Europe, specifically because they have a Cyber Resilience Act coming down with a bunch of requirements that feel a lot like sovereignty posture. Um, I come from a Native American reservation. I work with natives all the time. We have jumped into the internet with an understanding that we are a sovereign nation surrounded by another nation, and we have a dependent status to the US. We are literally called dependent nations. So that means we have all of our own positive rights. We're also, when building our critical infrastructure or any of our online services, beholden to the same requirements that a 3 or 4 letter agency of the US government would be. So I've always seen this tension, and the like cybersecurity leads that come from these tribal nations have the hardest jobs in the world and the most interesting jobs in the world. And for the first time in my life, I'm getting questions from a like European stakeholder, and I'm able to say, there's a tribal representative that knows the answer to that and has the protocol for that. This is something that we thought about 15 years ago. So the maturity of the internet, and realizing that not everything is safe just because it's a reliable company that you're used to seeing online, right? Those are independent things.
That's
um,
the most politically correct way I think anyone has ever said that on this show. So
yeah.
thanks. So tell me, from the on a street level, I've noticed that in the last, I don't know, let's say decade, that there is a more laissez-faire attitude amongst the younger generations around their own personal information online, to such an extent where, I often use the quote that they say, I'd say, do you realize that when you've signed this terms and conditions, this happened? And most of the responses, let's say for my daughter's network of friends, is who cares? They're in their early 20s, just it's like, yeah, sure, or they say I've got nothing to hide. But it oscillates between I don't care who can access my information because I've got nothing to hide, or I don't care what information's out there. And then there's some outliers who say, but I've used a false date of birth in every single online thing, and my Instagram profile is actually a dog. So there's this kind of attitude. I sometimes catastrophize things in talks or in sometimes in book chapters around what it would take for that mindset to be more aware of risk. Things that I call the lights off moment. But do you feel that this is a concern in any way, that there's a laissez-faire attitude, or at least empirically it would appear that way? Secondly, if there is that type of attitude, is that something that could be transient based on the way of things moving forward anyway? And if not, and or C, what would it take for there to be a step shift of mentality?
Yeah, I think right now the relative apathy around personal security, I think it's honestly very reasonable if this is your first decade getting involved with the internet. We, by and large, have not put in any anti-surveillance mechanisms into the systems that we use. We have no idea who made the chip and what might be additionally on that chip. You
Hmm.
don't know if your computer system even actually really has an off button, right?
Hmm.
In most of the systems that we engage with. So, because they've been so removed from control over their own destiny in these spaces, right? Completely cut off from the ability to make those decisions for themselves. In order to engage with online platforms now, you have to accept that there will not be anonymity. And I think that's really creating this divergence of, do you engage with social media or do you not at all? Do you have a hard line on understanding what kind of hardware and software you have in your devices, or did you buy the one that you could afford? Right? So if security is not your highest priority, then there is really, really no way to get the kind of security posture that you could have as an individual even 10 or 15 years ago, because the data is just too available.
Yeah.
And I think the one thing people could do a little bit better or understand a little bit better is that when there is this apathy, even when they do want to put in good security practice, right? Like, okay, I don't want to be tracked in this location. Let me turn off my phone or let me put it into airplane mode. That doesn't work.
Wondering how you can phrase that. Yeah, that's quite right. I've noticed that there's in an Alice, Bob, and Charlie personas, there is a percentage of, let's say, Alice who is increasingly suspicious of the practices. And then there's the Bobs that is starting to take action due to the suspicion of the various different nefarious activities. And then there's the Charlie that is air gapped and is detached, or at least one step removed from any service that can't be completely audited. I mean, personally, I veer more towards the Charlies of the world, and I wouldn't really use the software readily if it wasn't open source, so I wouldn't be able to authenticate it. So as far as I'm concerned, it has to be open source, otherwise I can't. How do I know where the vulnerabilities and the exploits or whatever the nefarious code is if I can't see the bloody thing? So anyway, so I kind of it's a fundamental for me, it's a fundamental principle of the whole thing. But if of the Alice, Bob, and Charlie scenario, personas in that way, would you feel that the volume of Alice's is growing? Because my suspicion is that it's growing even in contrast to what we've just said about the apathy. I nowadays, if I say to people, you do realize that if you upload this picture of your kids to Facebook, they own the IP of the information that, and 5 years ago, people thought I was talking nonsense. Now everyone goes, yeah, I know. And I watched a Netflix documentary about it. The irony, but so do you feel is there a wave of awareness? Are the Alice's growing in number?
Yeah, I think the awareness is growing, but until we've got systems that they can rely on,
Hmm.
it's going to really change that game. Um, there's two things, right? Static databases, you have to protect those, but anything where you have real-time information, right? Your GPS location, real-time information, all somebody has to do very quickly and computationally is run like an anti-fraud algorithm over it. Dynamic time warping, perfect. Only takes two columns. I just need to know your GPS coordinates and your like central ID. I get these off of every phone
Yeah.
for free. I can get it by walking close to someone's phone. I can get it from a distance.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, I think we are going to be seeing in the next 5 to I'm going to take this to a because of the experts that I've asked here, anywhere from 5 to 30 years, we should expect post-quantum reality to come in because nobody agrees on when it's coming in. It's either coming in 5 years or 30 years. And that is down to an official report that I looked at and I said, that's as close as we got it. And you said 5 years is happening now and 3 years from today. Okay. So as we move closer to that, I think people have this awareness. We're going to remember this moment in time. And it is true, right? Post like people are finding data right now that they're just collecting and hoping to decrypt even with the best security practice that we have in place. Um, but I will say, I think the world is radically changing because security has become more baked in. And I have seen one condition that really excites me and it has a lot of positive consequences for people moving in the future. There is a thing called hardware attestation. It's kind of complex technology, but suffice to say that it is not just validating the software, it's validating the hardware. Um, it's the first case where I've ever seen us be able to do something above and beyond legal requirements. What do I mean by that? I mean that for decades and decades, we've had human trafficking databases sitting on the internet. They're big, they're distributed systems, they move around, they use every form of diffusion that they can to keep that data up so that we can't find it and take it down. If you were to find one of those databases, you can't copy it. You can't create a secondary distribution vector for it. So it was almost impossible for us to get around this whack-a-mole of a really, really serious problem. That meant that we couldn't share that data. We could not get ahead of this major, major human trafficking problem. Now we have a security posture that goes above and beyond any of those regulations. We can now not only hold those databases when we find them, but we can now share those databases between anti-human trafficking services. The first time in history, against a massive federated cyberware cybercrime system, we have a completely centralized, completely trusted way to store and send that data. We have found a way to move our security postures around positive rights, right? How do we protect all the individuals that are involved while being able to reduce harm? We can live out that philosophy when and where we have the hardware and the software to do it. And I do think that this moment in time is going to make sure that we don't really have that bottleneck anymore. We are building all of our devices so that they have security in mind. And once we have that, Alice doesn't have to be so apathetic because they have true agency. It's where it's coming from. If they actually have control over their devices or what kind of databases that they are sitting in and where, then yeah, they're going to have strong opinions about it, and they should.
Yes. Hell yeah. Oh, die on that hill. I mean, I mean, obviously, anyone the viewers of this will know. I mean, what I've been building with my wonderful team around the world with Self is is trying to construct parts of an ecosystem of that type of future. And I think that um, it's I don't know why it shouldn't be like this at now after this. Your episode number 33, and moments across the last 32 episodes and this one 33 episodes as well. There's moments like this where I feel reassured. Not that I'm doubting the logic of these things, but when someone else tells me what I fundamentally believe, it's and my therapist would say that it's some kind of um, PTSD handling mechanism that I haven't managed to dose the right psychopharmacology for. But yeah, I find this reassuring, and and without wanting to be too smoke blowy of your work, what you're doing should be even more greatly recognized, I think. I'm glad that it is being. I'm glad that you're being awarded the prizes and being sought after. Is there is there something that what action could people take from watching this who find what you've said so resonant they want to do something about it? What should they do? And this could be something that's individualized and practical to their own security, but I was wondering also more towards if there's something that they can sign, march for, subscribe to. What action could people take?
Yeah. So I think right now, it depends, like if you're a software developer or just a general person. If you're a general person, yeah, I think you should take a little bit of time thinking about your specific devices. One of the things that you really want to check in on and have an awareness of is, does this device actually turn off? When I hit the power button, does it actually turn off? If not, you have a surveillance machine in your house. And it doesn't mean that some foreign adversary is coming after you. It could be a random person who's just interested in collecting audio and visual files.
Mhm.
Those are the cases that we see all the time. Um, it's a very good idea to disentangle yourself from your phone. If you can go out in the world without your phone, which is increasingly difficult because people pay with their phones, So there is no mindful moment without the thing that monitors exactly where and when you are. That's one of the strongest identifiers for things like targeted ads now. It's not just the stuff that you search, but it's also where you've been. So yeah, finding a way to dissociate those signals if you can, because putting it on airplane mode won't be enough. Knowing the security posture of your specific devices, really just knowing, does it turn on or off? Does it turn on or off? And if it does not turn formally off when I turn it off, especially things like Alexas and Siris, then yeah, unplug it if you really don't want it to be listening, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Faraday cage fan, so I think this yours is definitely the most. That's the most easiest. It's one of the easiest things to do because it's first principles. It's like, is this still,
Yeah,
is there a signal coming in and out of this device still?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's the psychology of it really is that people think about like, oh, I don't care what I'm broadcasting, right? I don't feel like it's sensitive data, and that's all right. But the reality of it, if you're an individual, you're more likely to be surveilled or attacked by another individual on the internet, whatever their reasons may be. It's not that you're broadcasting information out, it's that you're inviting strangers into your house and they're sitting there without your knowledge, listening and sometimes seeing. That has proliferated. So, yeah, I think those really just basic awareness. I know that's not like a strong go sign a petition, but know what the devices you have are and how they work, and be curious enough to just know that. And if there's something about the way that they work that you're not comfortable with, change your actual behavioral patterns to be comfortable engaging with the technology. Now, if you're a software developer, there are a lot of things that we could be doing differently. In open source software, I think right now, be sincere about being able to be contacted for 0-day events. That just means you need to have a markdown file in every single repository that is labeled security.md that lets me, as a security researcher or 0-day communicator, know how to contact you if I see a problem in your code that we need to fix quickly and quietly, because it may be a serious concern. We are pretty much getting the open source that's under foundations to hit that level so that we've got immediate communication. Um, and most of the maintainers who are up for doing security have stuck around. A lot of the maintainers that did all of this for fun uh, have kind of left the building, which is one of my concerns around open source. So I'm just going to remind everybody about this one thing. And I think about this in open source and in everything else all the time, especially when regulation is coming down. I like to remind people that you can still code for fun. You can code to understand the way that code works because we live in code all the time. You and me right now, we're communicating over several layers of code. Helps to understand the way the world works, right? A real curiosity about complex systems. Um, and not to get rid of that joy and that way of like thinking and playing with computers as a tool, because that's all they are. They're not anything magic and they're not things to be afraid of either. But around open source, I keep thinking about the fact that it was like the 1970s before Native Americans in the continental US were allowed to legally dance in public again. There was regulation from the US government that specifically said, and here's the interesting part, right? Here's the generational part. Um, you could not dance at a powwow if you were specifically under the age of 50. You could if you were older. Yeah.
Okay.
Breaking apart generational knowledge, breaking apart generational understanding of cultures and customs. The internet has its own customs and cultures and knowledge. And I think there has been a kind of intentional breaking apart, specifically around agency and sovereignty for individuals.
Yes.
And I really want people to get back to playing with a little chipboard, right? Do go get a Raspberry Pi, go have fun with it. Be less afraid to take the bolts off of your own computer and look at it. And I will pay for anyone's computer that breaks if they actually take that advice. But
If they're using a computer that allows you to do that, which is a thing in itself,
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, this is true. So yeah, understanding the base systems that you're using because things do get more complex. Right, I'm working on the cybersecurity mechanisms around agentic AI, but that's right. It's just a progression on knowledge bases. And you do have to jump in wherever you are generationally and say, okay, this is the total space that we're in now. I know that it's moving quickly, but how much of this can I richly understand and how am I motivated to understand it? Once you understand that you have to have a base of knowledge before you have that sense of agency brought back to you, then you can get there. But we've got to encourage people to keep dancing with open source, with tools, with computers. It's not just a commodity, it is a tool that you can build yourself. Um, yeah, I want to see more of that. And I'm doing a lot of hackathons, getting word out to people, but reminding them that they are just tools. They aren't these prefabbed things that we just handed fall, like have fall out of the sky. If you feel like that, you're probably extremely at risk because you really don't understand the systems that you're using. Take it apart just a little bit. Spend a little bit of time with your device to understand it. Is there anything about the systems you're using right now that you would want to change? Yeah, if there is,
Yeah,
what are the ways to implement those changes? Okay. Would that only take you an hour to implement? And would it make you feel differently about the way that you use the device?
yeah.
Yes. Very simple steps that you can take
I
just
think
in
I
accepting it.
say to people, if you find a hidden, if you find a way of finding hidden folders in your system, find out what the meaning of those hidden folders is and what's inside those hidden folders and why they'd be hidden in the first place. Just,
Yes.
curiosity. Just that's interesting. Why would that
Yeah.
be?
Yeah. It couldn't possibly be from, I mean, it's also increasingly hard though, even to find like hidden files. There's a lot of vulnerabilities where it's stuck at different levels of the system. So it is. I mean, it's a challenging moment in time, but I think like if you can set out like an hour, especially if you have like a kid in the house, set out just a single hour and say, all right, I just want to explore what is the security posture of like this one phone, my one phone. Can I understand this? Is there anything that we could do right now to put in place? Taking those like small steps because it's the same as like brushing your teeth. In my mind, there are things that you should know how to do that you have to do, and things will be much worse for you in the long run. And even though they don't feel quite so bad, just by not making those small steps yourself.
Yeah,
And the people that get into that mindset, it's not from a place of paranoia. It's from a place of deep, deep reflection and
yeah,
understanding that they have control and they're taking control over what they actually do have control over.
yeah.
It's
I
easy.
have
Use your hands.
Yeah, I have to continually use the analogy of locking the door of your house and bolting the windows shut at night time
Mhm.
versus 30 years ago, 40 years ago, you didn't necessarily need to in some neighborhoods. Now you do in almost every neighborhood. And I use that analogy so people can understand that there is a hygiene level of security here that should not be it shouldn't be seen as something that is less important than locking your door or less important than closing your windows at night if you live on street level or beneath. And so that's I'm hoping that these messages land and we're battling even with ethics TV, we're battling against the algorithms to some extent. So whoever's watching this and listening to this on whatever channel, thank you for finding it because some of the more well-known channels have managed to somehow algorithm ourselves out. So we're saying something that seems to be um, we're saying stuff that seems to be contentious, but I think that the ethic of this is a very clear moral principle of accountability and responsibility that we can all individually take. And that shouldn't be contentious. In the same way as being able to query a code base of a developer shouldn't be contentious. If you're not hiding anything, it shouldn't be a contentious issue. It should be like, yeah, go to GitHub. There's the repo. Have a look. That
Mm,
should be it, I think.
yeah. Core pillar of open source, transparency. It's the only one that security cares about.
Right.
So,
That's right. And no one knows as much as everyone. Love it. Okay, well, listen, thank you so much, Sal. This has been partly therapeutic. and partly insightful. So there's a combination of both, and I hope that it's added value to the listeners as well. Thank you so much, and I have zero doubt we'll be speaking again. And there's some things I'd like to commission you and your teams for moving forward as well with Self. So we'll talk about that offline. But thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it.